Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this conversation about remote workflows. This episode is not only about editing remotely, but everything surrounding the editor and how everything connects. We will be taking time to answer your questions, so don't forget to add a hashtag workflow questions so we can easily find your questions on Twitter. Together with me, we have some of the brightest minds in our industry, and I would like to let them introduce themselves to you. Chris, my friend, could you let our audience know a little bit about who you are, where you're based, and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. I've been in this business for about 35 years, editing primarily for the last 25-ish. And before that, it was mostly live production. I don't have any illusions about the type of stuff I do. It's very normal, just, corporate video, nothing fancy. It's basically the dissemination of information that I do.
All right, thanks, Chris. Now let's go to Michael. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and where you're based as well?
Sure. As you said, my name is Michael Kamas. I'm currently in Southern California. I started off as a sound editor and video editor for about a decade, and then I kind of pivoted to the more nerdy, geeky portion, and I've been in system integration and consulting for the past decade or so. And over the past year and a half, I've kind of transitioned to a company called Bebop Technology, which is virtualizing post-production in the cloud. And I also have a web series called 5 Things, where I stick a camera on myself and I pontificate on zeros and ones.
Well, thank you, Michael. And if you guys don't know that series, you should definitely check it out. Now, Joseph, that's your turn. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Photo Joseph. I'm a content creator until they come up with a better term for that. It basically means I produce video content both for clients and for YouTube. I have a YouTube channel at Photo Joseph, and actually do still photography as well, which is my original background. And I do a fair amount of, most of the work I do is solo work, but I do a fair amount of projects involving other people, and quite often they're remote, and so that's why I'm part of this party.
Wow. Thank you very much, Joseph. Now, Sophie, it's your turn. So same thing, if you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm based in New York City, and I am a feature film editor. And as far as remote work goes, I don't like to leave my house if I don't have to. So I've been kind of working on remote workflows for a very long time. I've cut the last 3 features now almost entirely remotely and live in real time, as well as different remote proxy workflows where I wasn't on set and we'd have everything, all the media delivered remotely, and then continue that with the edit.
Well, thank you very much. And Steven, you're based in California, right? Can you tell us a little bit more?
Good morning. Yeah, I'm in California. I am a film editor and assistant editor. Last 10 years or so have been spent moving from news to documentary to ads and now finally features. Last project that I got into Sundance, and the last project that I assistant edited on got picked up by Apple TV Plus. That was The Banker. And I've been working pretty much primarily in Final Cut X since 2013 now.
Well, thank you, Steven. And of course, now, last but absolutely not least, Tony Gallardo. Tony, please tell me that you're not in California. We need to mix this up a little bit.
I'm definitely not in California. I'm deep in the heart of Texas. I have a little production company here called Tomiga. So I usually am in the small form work. We do ads, commercials, corporate videos. So everything from running the creative side, directing, editing, to doing all of the tech stuff, coming up with workflows and making sure everything's running tip-top. So yeah, that's what we do.
Thanks, Tony. So I'd like to thank, first of all of you to have agreed to donate some of your precious time to be here and be part of this conversation. And the same way that we will not only concentrate on one NLE or another, neither we will make a NLE battle or try to convince you to use one over another. We also need to acknowledge that although some industries that have historically been dominant in the video industry, like cinema and broadcast, are not anymore the only parts of the industry with a majority of editors. Since for the past 10 to 15 years, the video industry has grown side by side with other internet services such as social media and video on demand services like YouTube, Vimeo, and others. And more companies rely on those mediums to share their stories and marketing strategies. More and more films and series are also moving to platforms like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime Video, and Apple TV+. So we have a very wide range of professionals that are somehow affected by the need to start working remotely, whatever that may mean. This means that we will do our best to talk about solutions and workflows that can be used by everyone. It doesn't mean that every solution will be for everyone though. So let's start with cinema. We have 3 guests that have been working in the cinema industry in a wide range of projects. We should also take a look at what each of us interpret as remote. Remote for me means that something is happening elsewhere, but I still have to access it. That could be a whole computer, storage, or any part of the puzzle. Michael, as you mentioned, you have been around for a while. And can you help our audience understand, and this audience being the audience that works in cinema, what are their top choices in terms of remote workflows? And of course, don't forget, we also need to tell them how they can act right now and implement those workflows you're talking about.
Sure. Well, obviously, we have to address the elephant in the room, which is remote editing and what does that mean? I like to think of the term remote editing is like when we're talking about 4K, we say 4K, even though we know 4K may also mean UHD. Right? It's a catch-all term. So working remote to me means, well, you're editing from content in the cloud, maybe you're remoting into a system that's sitting elsewhere, or it's getting copies of your media from your facility and going home and edit. And that's primarily what we've seen over the past month or so has been really 3 big choices. One has been, I'm going to, as a facility owner, let people remote into the systems that are already at the facility, which of course is a little bit safer for security because you're not taking stuff home. Of course, that means you're most likely doing everything in Windows because there's a severe shortage of Mac OS screen sharing solutions that is good enough for us creatives. We then run into the folks who said, we trust our employees enough and we won't violate any contracts we have by putting content on drives or proxies on drives and then sending those drives home, and we hope that the creatives aren't leaking it or sharing it. The last solution has been something that I've been really interested in, which is people saying, you know what, we're just going to do everything in the cloud. Moving forward, we're going to do everything in the cloud, and that'll be a lot easier because we can grow and contract with what business is coming in. So those are the 3 primary ways we've seen remote editing happen over the past month or so.
All right, but cloud is quite expensive too, right? I mean, that's one thing that we definitely have to keep in mind. What are a little bit of the costs that people should expect to if they plan to move to the cloud?
Well, the cloud is no pun intended, pretty nebulous, right, in terms of how it's used. Are you using it to push-pull content? Are you using it with a virtual machine in a data center where everything is in the cloud? So if we look at the creme de la creme, which is having everything in the cloud, you're probably looking at $1,000 a user per month, give or take. And a vast majority of that is going to be what the cloud charges. The big public cloud providers like Amazon and Microsoft and Google, they're not cheap and they don't make their money from media and entertainment. And because of that, they can charge what they want to charge because other industries will pay that. I think what we're going to see over the next year or so as more private data centers pop up, that price is going to drop and we're going to see doing everything in the cloud be a lot more accessible financially.
Okay. We also have Sophie here with us, and recently she wrote an article about editing remotely, and editing remotely being she is away from the director and she needs to be right next to the director and them having a collaboration. Sophie, can you talk a little bit about that solution, because it's not really in the cloud, right?
Right. Yeah. So for me as a narrative editor, the biggest thing that I need to worry about is being able to mimic the idea of sitting in the edit room with the director and being able to really comment on performance and rhythm and pacing in real time and there's like a month or so of the whole editing process where it's just every day you're just sitting next to the director and you're just working through all that stuff together. And trying to do that kind of with a passing back notes is difficult because you need to try stuff. You need to say, well, what happens if we take that one performance and put it in? How does that affect the scene? And then you have another idea and you move to something else. So it's really important to really be able to collaborate in real time. So the article that I wrote is a way to do that. And it uses a hardware that can be different types of hardware. The one that I happen to be using is the Blackmagic Web Presenter. And it takes your video feed out of your NLE and it creates a web camera feed that you can feed into Skype or Zoom or whatever you want. And it allows you to really mimic that process of sitting there with the director. And the latency is very low. So if you're kind of watching back a scene and the director says, okay, let's pause there, you'll be able to pause immediately and kind of work through frame by frame cuts and really get a sense of what you're doing. With that said, I actually do use it in collaboration with keeping media on the cloud as well. And I think like what Michael's doing with Bebop is really cool for that. I use to kind of keep costs down as more of an independent creator. I use Frame.io, I use Dropbox, and I have my own copy of the media, and often the director will have their own copy of the media, and we'll keep shared media on something that automatically updates, like Dropbox, like music, sound effects, incoming VFX. We'll just keep all of those on Dropbox so that we can kind of keep everything in sync that way.
So if you would shoot today to start working on a project and all of you need to be remote, would you still use the same workflow of the person is shooting and then they are putting on Dropbox and everyone is receiving that way, or would you do it any differently?
That's what I would do right now. I'm actually on a feature that just wrapped about a month ago. And the way we set up that workflow was they were shooting in Indiana. I'm based in New York. And they created proxy media that was a low-grade ProRes, and they synced everything on set. And then they uploaded that to me via Dropbox. You can do the same thing with Frame.io and features in the past. I use Frame.io. It kind of depends on whatever the film's budget is. And it's super easy. The media is very lightweight. Every single day, each day's footage gets uploaded, and then I download it within 10 minutes, and I have everything locally, and then anyone else who needs to access it can also download it, and they'll have it locally. If you use a service like Frame.io, what's really cool is that it's all there on their server for you to access via kind of your phone or your iPad, whatever. So producers that need to see it can see it too. So yeah, I would use the same thing just for efficiency. I mean, people still like to send drives sometime, but they don't realize that it's actually become way less efficient to load everything onto a drive, to mail it out, to have to get the drive to my assistant, and then my assistant has to get that media to me. If you put everything on the cloud, everyone can access it at the same time. And I think that's what Michael's working towards at Bebop too, which is so appealing there, that you just don't need to worry about it. You upload it once and then everyone has access to all the same stuff.
Now, sorry. Now, obviously we have also to remember that we're talking about remote stuff, and when we're talking about remote stuff, we're depending a lot on internet and internet connections. And right now we are assuming that we're talking to people that actually have access to some sort of fast internet connection, right? Now, Michael, how would it work? Let's say I have 20 terabytes of footage right now, and this is stuck in the office, and no one can get to the office except for one person, because one person is okay. How would they, for example, put it all in the cloud and start editing from the cloud, if that would be what they would want to do?
Well, you have to remember that any kind of remote workflow, which has distributed creatives anywhere where the media isn't, you're always going to be limited by your internet. Whether you're editing in the cloud, whether you're using Dropbox, whether you're using WeTransfer, you're always going to be limited by your upload speed. So it's not something that is squarely on cloud creative. If we are looking at getting 20 terabytes to the cloud, well, you either give it to multiple people, let them all upload at the same time. Luckily, if you're at a facility, usually you have facility-grade internet, which means you have faster upload than you have at your house. or you're doing something like Glacier or I'm sorry, Amazon Snowball, where they actually deliver a drive to you and you dump everything on there, and then they take it to their Amazon place in the sky and upload it for you. So upload is always going to be an issue. Luckily, download, especially if you're working in the cloud, you're not downloading that 4K material or 8K or 16K material. You're only downloading or streaming the pixels that change on the screen. So we're talking 20 or 50 megabits a second. And that's, easily fits down a normal internet pipe at most people, at least in the States, the internet that they have. So upload is always going to be a bottleneck for any remote workflow, but download is manageable.
Okay, now we're going to go to Steven. Steven, in your last work as assistant editor on the movie The Banker, I know that you guys used a way of collaborating remotely. Can you tell us a little bit of what was your scenario in which you guys needed some sort of remote collaboration and how you did that?
Yeah, so in our case, we implemented sort of the DNA of a remote workflow, even though we didn't necessarily need to work that way, even though we were in the same office. The first part of the film during production, it was remote. We were sending dailies out to our then assistant editor, Kevin Bailey, who was working somewhere else via Aspera. He would sync and log and send a Final Cut library zipped up over the cloud to our editor. Later on, once post began officially, what we did is, again, even though we're in the office, we had 2 identical drives loaded up with all of our footage, proxies, all of our audio, some basic graphics and sound effects, and then we used a generic cloud service to do something very similar to what Sophie was talking about, where new incoming media that would be updated daily would be synced, and we would just use clever organization, primarily making folders that are dated properly, and use those as a sort of Dropbox. So we would check that folder for that day, daily, and pull off whatever is there onto our local drives. And so this way, it made it so that we had the flexibility to leave our office and to continue working uninterrupted, because we already had our project files locally and our footage locally with a little portable drive we could take with us, encrypted, and then anything else that needed to be updated on a daily basis was available on the cloud.
Okay, now there is one thing that I tend to tell people, and I'm pretty sure that Michael, at some point in time, he has said that as well, is that when you're working with, let's say, a cloud provider such as Google Drive or Dropbox, if you're using a sync application, you do not have a backup that's in the cloud, because if you delete from your computer, it deletes from the cloud as well. If you delete on the cloud, it deletes from all computers. So if anyone press delete anywhere, everyone loses. So wondering, did you have, I'm pretty sure that you had backups for sure, but how was this workflow of getting the backups and getting it on Google Drive? Were you using some specific software that was helping you with that, or just directly on Finder or something like that?
Well,
Michael?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm a big fan of the 3-2-1 backup strategy,
Yep.
right? Which is you have 3 copies on 2 different types of mediums and 1 is off-site. So if you're relying on the copy in the cloud as your only backup, you're skating on thin ice, so to speak. So you should always have a backup, at least one backup somewhere else in the event something happens.
Okay, so how was for you, Stephen, with the Banker?
Yeah, we were just using software that would sync drives, and we had a number of other drives. And yeah, I definitely recommend subscribing to what Michael's recommending. 3-2-1 is an absolute must. And so we had a number of drives that we would sync, I don't know, every 3-4 days. I would personally check to make sure that project files were synced daily between these drives as well. So yes, never rely just on a cloud syncing service on its own.
Okay, so I have 2 questions here that they fit in still with the cinema, and then we're going to start moving on to away from cinema a little bit. The first one came on Twitter from Dennis Layton, He asks, what I've been wondering lately is that if with all of this COVID thing, production houses will be more open to having assistant editors working remotely when all this goes away. I think, Michael, since you've been working for quite a while now, getting companies to move to the cloud or use the cloud somehow, what's your perspective on this situation right now? Do you think they will be more open to get assistant editors, maybe even editors working remotely?
I think facilities and creatives have wanted to do this for a long time, but our industry, and I'll get on a little bit of a soapbox here, the Hollywood film and TV industry has been very hamstrung by archaic, old security guidelines. And a lot of these content creators, and I mean, the studios and whatnot, they've mandate that companies that will work for them adhere to the security guidelines, and they keep tacking on security guideline after guideline after guideline, and none of these have been revamped over the years. So these contractors who are working for these studios and production companies can't do that because their contracts explicitly say you can't work in the cloud or you can't work remote. You must have these 10 layers. And I think what we're going to see moving forward, and actually in the next month or so, is we're going to start to see a complete revisit and revamp of these security guidelines to permit folks who are in contracted positions to work remotely and those companies to allow them to work remotely. And I think that's going to change drastically the amount of people who have to be within the four walls of the facility. And I think what you're also going to see is smaller companies are going to be able to take on some of these jobs, and not just the larger facilities who have this immense CapEx expenditure for security.
Wow, that sounds like a very positive change to come. And actually, this whole thing about remote workflows and remote working, what that seems to me is that not only you're going to be working with those that are near you. So, for example, if you're working in LA, the productions house in LA, they're working with people that are in LA. Now they're going to have the possibility of working with whoever they want, no matter where they are. So I find that as a super positive thing. Now, on the subject of privacy, Sophie, you've been using on your workflow video conferencing devices, right? Or video conferencing services, right? Have you come across any limitation on your contracts? Because I think you work more on independent films, right? So how has this privacy thing been for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what Michael is saying. In post in general, it's built on the first transition over to digital, and it's still, a lot of that architecture and framework is still there, and people use it because it works. So I've completely come up against all of the stuff that Michael is saying, and I think what I'd love to say is that we, the people that are working here, need to drive this change. Like I said, I've cut the last couple of features remotely, and I had a lot of pushback from the studios to do that, and they didn't want me to do it, and they really fought, and I just held my ground, and I said, no, this is how I work. I love the project, and I want to work with you and with all of you, but this is how I do it, and these are the ways that I'll make you feel comfortable. And they ended up kind of drafting a new contract between us that was completely fine. And I think once we built that trust, and they saw that not only did it enhance my creativity and the way that I work, that the directors also loved it, and that everyone ended up really liking it. Now I can point back to that, and I can say, well, look, this studio did that with me, and you can call them and talk to them and see how they felt about it. And I've been able to kind of use that to keep, bumping up into these other productions to be able to do the same thing. And so I would definitely encourage everyone to speak up and say to, people, well, things have changed. Here are 5 projects I can point you to. We can figure out how they handled security and what they did, and go from there.
Well, that's nice, because the more examples we have, the more it's going to seem like that we've been doing this for a while, and then the more is going to happen, and then that's a snowball effect, right? Now, we have another question here, and that's very interesting. It's coming from Jay Frostin. How can editors and assistant editors share an Avid project when there is no ISIS or Nexus, and also there isn't $100,000 to spend? Michael, do you want to answer that?
Sure. Yeah, there's a ton of ways. First of all, you need the right software, which is Avid Media Composer Ultimate. You got to have Ultimate. If you want to do real-time project sharing, which is multiple users accessing the same project in bins at the same time, you need to either buy Avid storage, which starts under 10 grand, so it's not $100,000, it starts under 10. You can get third-party storage that emulates the Avid file system. Those are usually under 10 as well, usually start about 5 or 6. Or you can look into something like a Mimic, which is a software layer that you can run, which kind of tricks Avid and tricks the storage into working like an Avid shared product environment. I've seen a lot of success with third-party storage volumes that are emulating Avid, and that's probably the first route I'd go. But I think there is kind of a stigma in the industry that Avid is really expensive, and hey, I'm not going to lie to you, they are on the high end, but you can start under 10 grand with some really, really good Avid storage for project sharing.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Michael, for that. And of course, we are currently live streaming to YouTube and to Twitter, so there is quite a lot of people watching this. And if you're watching right now and you have questions to anyone in our panel, we have Chris FENWICK, Michael Cames, Photo Joseph, Sophie Marshall, Stephen Moyer, and Tony Gallardo. Of course, just send these questions on Twitter with hashtag workflow questions. Now, let's move a little bit away from the whole Hollywood and cinema thing, and let's go into something that I guess we're going to have the vast number of editors being in this audience here, which is working in corporate, social, and general marketing, ad campaigns, and so on. First of all, we have Chris. Chris, can you tell us a little bit of how it is that you've been working lately since this COVID-19 started?
Well, to be clear, I want to first say that there's multiple issues that we're all dealing with. One is how we're pushing files around and stuff like that. And frankly, Felipe, you could do a whole show just on that. Maybe get Emery on, whatever. That is one whole issue. Then there's what Sophie and I know that myself are doing, where we are sharing screens and decision making. Okay, it's not so much moving the files around, but it's the decision making, and that's a huge aspect of this remote workflow. And I'm a huge proponent of what Sophie's doing. She and I we were all talking before we went live, and that's stuff we've been doing for a long time in terms of like sharing our user interface and being able to make decisions on a remote basis. One of the things that has come up, and we've done it at the corporate level for a long time, and now moving into the third aspect of this, and this show is supposed to be actionable workflows. So what can we do today if we're all sequestered in our homes, or whatever word you want to call that? We're being asked to stay out of public, stay away from the office, blah blah blah. Can we still work? Now, I really feel for people in the creative, especially the high-end creative world, because nobody's sending 100 people to a set anymore, and it's awful. It's a terrible thing. But in my world, and again, there's kind of like a bell curve, and in the production world, I'm kind of in the hunk of it. There's a lot of people doing the stuff that I do. We're just sharing information. We have execs and trainers and whatnot that need to reach out, and I think we just did a whole thing about security, your internet security and blah blah, just dumb stuff like that. But we've actually moved to shooting our shows remotely as well, and through what you're doing here, Felipe, using Skype and NDI and what's the other stuff, like the Zoom or whatnot. That's one way that you can be pulling images and interviews away, or you could just be doing what I'm doing, and I'm literally just screen scraping. I'm setting up a nice user interface with a host who's at his home in one state and a guest who's at their home in another state. And if you set up your screen carefully with the two images side by side, I could just hit a screen recorder and I get both cameras, and then through some compound clips and some editing tricks. I can create a multicam of those people, that one file, and I have a two-way interview. And one of the things that I've been really immersing myself in for the last couple of weeks is the concept of what I've been kind of in my mind calling personal broadcasting, what we are doing right here. In a world that is shrouded with isolation and our, trying to be safe, that damn boom, sorry. Trying to be safe, health.
I can't bleep, man.
I know. Everybody is getting to the point where we have to look great. Now, Joseph does this all the time. Look at that shot he's got. He looks awesome. The rest of us were at our homes. And I want to point out that when Felipe started this broadcast and all 6 or 7 of us flicked on the thing, he did not change any of these shots. And yeah, we kind of all do this for a living, but this concept of being able to broadcast yourself professionally, or personally rather, this is happening. And yes, for us it's easy, but what I'm seeing is that at the corporate level, anybody who has anything to say, they are getting to the point where they realize they need to know how to sit in front of a camera properly. They need to know how to have themselves sound okay. And because of that, we're having the ability to literally just scrape screens and do screen captures and get multiple cameras in one recording. So we have people in 6 different people in 6 different locations. 4 of them are staff. You got your producer watching in, you got your director watching in, you got your content matter expert watching in. I'm watching in as the editor, and then you have a host and a guest. I only make those 2 cameras live. And so it is a way, and I realize, I'm not making big fancy movies.
Okay, but there's one thing that worries me about the post-production side of what you're saying is that you're acting as a cameraman, right? I mean, the
talent is, and the concept of personal broadcasting, we all have to not just us in our industry, but I'm beginning to see at the corporate level, if you have a message, if you have a voice that you need to share, people are cluing in. Oh, I have to learn how to use that web camera on my laptop or my iMac in my
True.
living room.
Well,
and what we're seeing people kind of like we did. They sit down and they've worked it out. There's like, I got to cut my window like this, and okay, now I look good, okay. And when they turn on their mic, it's like, okay, I can use that. It's not the greatest shot in the world. I wish I could send one of our DPs over there, but we can't. So we'll take this.
Well, we have a couple of questions here that are very related to each other, and they're gonna go for Chris and for Sophie. So I want to hear from Sophie first. And the question is, one of the questions is, and like I said, they're totally related. It comes from William Brito in Brazil. What changed in the way you edit when you don't have the director near you? Of course, for you right nowadays is pretty common, but that's the first part of the question. You edit when possible and then you video conference, or you make the options of the same scene, you're really working together. That's part one. And the other part is from Robbie Patton on Twitter. He asks, when you work with your director remotely, how do you usually like to speak with each other? FaceTime? What type of hardware and software does the director need to set up on their end? Thank you. Sophie.
Sure. Yeah, great questions. As far as what the process is like, I'll speak to how I do it, and I think it works pretty well. I'm on a feature right now, and this is how we're going about it. We're actually going to have our first Zoom session on Wednesday. So what I like to do, I really like Frame.io. I recommend checking it out. It makes notes really easy. It is integrated with all the major NLEs. I use their integration with Premiere, which I'm cutting in right now. So I like to do, right now where I'm at in this feature that I'm cutting is I just handed off my independent solo second pass at the film. So a couple weeks ago, I sent over an assembly. We use Frame.io for the director to write very detailed notes about the edit. I imported those notes directly into my Premiere timeline through the Frame.io panel, and I did that whole second round edit. I just sent him back that cut, and from there, it's kind of a very fluid process where there are going to be some scenes where we're just going to want to play with the performances, and we're going to get on Zoom and work that out together in real time. We're going to try stuff, see what happens, make adjustments, and then there are going to be some other notes that are going to be easier for me to do by myself. And those will be more things like, well, I know I want to try, I know we changed this take, let's put it back. Or let's put in these sound effects. Here's some temp music, let's get that in. So the way that I like to do it for this process is I usually kind of save the morning for that solo stuff, and I have a little list of things that, running things that I need to do on the edit. And then in the afternoon, I'll get together with the director and we'll collaborate for a couple of hours. I think I've found that it's much more efficient when you don't have to be traveling to someone else's house, both either for me traveling to an edit suite or the director traveling to the editor. You just kind of, you get there, you show up on Zoom and you're focused and you're ready to put in a solid, 3 or 4 hours of work, and then you feel good about that. And then you kind of leave it there for the day, and then I'll wrap up kind of little other things that I needed to do. And it's very, it's a little bit less stressful in a way. You're not there breathing down each other's neck. You're not kind of having to deal with your own schedule. If someone needs to take a phone call or someone wants to go refill their coffee, you just go do it. And I keep working, and it works really well. So that would be my answer for the first part. Sorry, can you repeat what the second question was?
The second part is, how do you usually like to speak with each other? FaceTime, and you said you're using Zoom, right? And what software and hardware you're using to make all of that happen?
Yeah. So if you go to my website, which is sophiemarshall.com, you'll see I have an article. It's the most recent published one there that outlines all of the software and hardware that I use to make this work for me. It also has a bunch of alternative options if some of that hardware is sold out right now or it's being updated. There's a couple of other options. There's also some software options you can try as well. But for me, I use the Blackmagic Web Presenter as my hardware encoder. I plug it into my computer and I feed the video from Premiere into that. And then that plugs into the computer as a webcam, and I use that as my video source in Zoom. Then I use Loopback, which is a simple audio routing software that's easy to set up to route the audio from Premiere to my headphones, also into Zoom. And otherwise, I just would also use, I usually use some kind of cloud-based software like I was talking about earlier for if we need to send cuts back and forth, or we need to send different types of media. I'm using Frame.io on this project. Sometimes I use Dropbox. It depends on what we're doing.
Yeah, and there's one thing that I just wanted to say about this workflow real quick, is that some people may wonder, oh, why can't I just screen share? First of all, you're not going to have audio in most of the platforms. It's not possible to send audio through screen share. Second one is a very historical reason, is that you can imagine the screen share as a second camera for your computer. It's a second video channel that's coming out of your computer. So once you turn on screen share, you're sending your video and you're sending another feed of video to that person that you're connected to. And historically speaking, because what we need to share over screen share needs to be readable, software is set to prioritize sharpness over frame rate. So then you have a low frame rate without audio on screen share, and then you continue having that proper audio and video on your video feed is on. So when you route all your screen through your camera feed, you're actually using a setting on the software that is, one, only you sending one video feed, two, is set to frame rate, and three, if you have a good amount of bandwidth, is going to get sharp. So does anyone have anything against what I just said in the panel?
Well, no, not against it, but I will add that I first of all, Sophie, I really appreciate.
And you have to answer the question too, so.
Because it pointed out to me that there are limitations in what I have been doing for the last 3 years since I started using Zoom. Zoom actually does have the ability There's a checkbox when you go to share your screen where you can choose to route your computer audio back to the person that you're sharing to. There is a place where you can turn on a video panel where you can continue to maintain a face-to-face in a much smaller window with the client. Because I find that I get much more on playback from a client just by watching their facial expressions than any words they say after I hit pause. There's so much of how we communicate with each other non-verbally through, our eyes and our eyebrows. I mean, these are all things that were created to help us communicate, and stripping those away from somebody is really bad. So there are ways to do it without the additional hardware, but I'm very intrigued, and I've already placed orders and bought software, Sophie, so it's all your fault.
Oh my God, Chris is already buying stuff. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit with Tony now. Tony, you have basically, what do you call it, the boutique, an agency? Have you grown already since the last time we were talking about this?
I like to say I'm a professional bum. I get to play with toys all day. But yeah, no, we do ads, commercials, corporate videos, so short form stuff. I think our longest stuff is anything around 10 minutes. So mostly 30-second spots, minute, 2-minute spots, that type of stuff. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to see all the different flavors of what we call remote. And I think Michael's right about you have to clarify what your version of remote is. What we've been doing is a lot of, working from the cloud, not necessarily working in the cloud. So I've been using the cloud more like a sneaker cloud, like you heard, working sneaker net. This is more like sneaker cloud. So the idea of now using the cloud as our repository to keep our, as like our own little, media volume. So it's been great, using Resolve and having direct Frame.io integration. And Resolve sees Frame.io as a volume. So whatever assets you have in Frame.io, you can just directly pull straight into your bins and start editing. And Resolve handles all of that for you. It'll download a low-res version and then also the original version as well. So you can start editing as fast as your internet connection, really. But it's really nice because, we're using a remote collaboration, if you will. So me and my team can all put together our assets using Frame.io and organize just like we would on our Jellyfish back at the office. And I do want to stress that too. It's like all of this remote editing and remote collaboration we're talking about. It's still very important to whatever structure and processes that you have and you used at your office. It's still really important to do that here and to make sure that everybody on the team is still using whatever your folder structure is and mimicking that on Frame.io, so you're not keeping things sloppy and you can find assets, file names, all that stuff. It's so easy, I think, as I'm working from home and 3 other editors are working from home, you might want to get lazy and I'll just do that later, but stick to a strict schedule and organization, so that way you can always find it. But then also later on, we're going to have to, at some point, everything's going to go back to a version of normal, if you will. So we're going to have to integrate everything that we've done remotely back into our system. So the more organized you are now, even while you're remote, that'll just help make it easier later on. But so yeah, using Resolve, it's great that it's got Frame.io integration, so we can pull from the cloud, we can edit, I can send out cuts. My clients and agency clients, they'll check it out on Frame.io. I don't even have to go to the web. All the markers and all the comments will disappear straight on the timeline. So that's a pretty nice feature to be able to just send a cut off and get comments right in the timeline directly. So that's pretty much how we're using it right now.
And I guess you don't have the need to have a synchronous session with your client, right? It's not common for you to have the client over your shoulder watching what you're doing, right?
Yeah, we don't necessarily have to have somebody in the room with us watching a cut. A lot of times the way we work, even when we're at the office, is we have the luxury of being able to kind of work on our own. So we'll have an extensive time to sit down, go over the script, go over the idea, go over the concept, and get into the client's head, so to say. And then they'll give us our opportunity and time to go and create and edit and come up with something that works. And so even when we're not working remotely, we're all at the office, we still use Frame.io, and a lot of my local clients rarely come in. Frame.io has been a really good workflow for us on the client side, but also on the master side. We keep all of our masters on there. So we got the enterprise version of Frame.io, and our clients have their own teams, so they can access all their masters at any time and pull down whenever they need to. So it's kind of an interesting way that we use it for review and approval, but also as a way to deploy masters for our clients.
Okay, so we've done a little bit of cinema. We've done a little bit of what I would call agency work, and I really want to go back to that. But I want to talk now to Photo Joseph, because he is pretty much independent. He does a lot of stuff by himself, and when it's not by himself, it's probably on a project-by-project cases. Joseph, can you tell us a little bit of how it is that you've been working probably for the past few years, and how this current situation has affected you?
Sure. What's interesting is this current situation hasn't really changed anything about how I work. When it's just me, obviously it's just me, and that's not really relevant here, but when I'm working with other clients, I live in a small town in Southern Oregon. None of my clients are here. My clients are all scattered all over the world. And so as an example, there's a project I'm working on right now where the client is in Seattle, and I'm doing all the production here, but I've decided to farm out the editing to speed things up. And the editor that I've hired happens to be in my same town. And when we first started working together, we were discussing, should we sneakernet this? What's the best way? But then Felipe here helped us set up a system where we're syncing data using Resilio Sync, I think it's called, to make sure that we both have the same files in place. I just put them into a specific folder on my system, and they show up on his. And then using PostLab to check Final Cut Pro projects in and out. And so this allows me to put the data in. He starts on a project, and it's a project where we have tons of little edits, probably 50 to 100 small projects, 5 to 10 minute long pieces. And so he creates a project, gets it going, checks it back in once he's ready for me to review it, and I take a look at it from there. And then the cool thing on that is once where I'm ready to show it to the client, that's when we integrate frame.io, which I guess now maybe I could use it for everything. I'm not totally sure how that would work, but frame.io gets a copy of the project, copy of the final render that my client in Seattle looks at, makes any notes on. So if they see any changes they want to make, they can make them right on there. And then both me and the editor have access to that, and they can go ahead and make the changes, or sometimes I'll make them myself. And that's part of the beauty of it, is that some changes I just want to make, or sometimes I want to tweak the edit, and sometimes I just send it back to him and say, you fix this. And it's great because we have this complete interaction, seamless back and forth that works really, really well. And I haven't seen him in months in person.
Wow, that's excellent. And the thing is, because you're just there by yourself, I think in general all your workflows are done in a way that is cloud ready or remote ready, right? So you're always thinking about how can you possibly get video out to someone, or your project out to someone, or a review out to someone, right? You do also photography work. How does that work for you? I mean, you obviously have to go there and photograph the person, and I guess those are not happening anymore.
Sure.
Is there anything different on the photography side of things?
Not really. I mean, these days, most of my production has been video anyway, but yeah, still photography stuff. Either people would come here into the studio, or maybe I'd go on location. Obviously, travel gigs are out right now, so there were shoots that I would get on a plane and go somewhere to do, so clearly that's not happening. But on the post side, it's all just here. And in photography specifically, I mean, interestingly, I've been using Lightroom CC, which is the cloud version, to sync photos, which even though it doesn't really affect how I would work, but it does allow me to work from home or from the studio, or on my iPad or on a laptop on a big computer, whatever, because all that data is synced. And so, you look at something like that and you think, man, wouldn't it be great if we had the same type of workflow for video, and the only thing keeping that from happening is bandwidth, right? We'd be talking about storing tens of terabytes in the cloud versus tens of gigabytes to keep all of your video files in sync. And it'll happen one day, right? There's no reason to believe that you won't one day have Final Cut Pro and Premiere and Resolve that's totally cloud-based and all the data is just everywhere. But that's bandwidth. I mean, that's all it is bandwidth and cloud storage, and it'll happen. It'll happen for sure. But I think when you look at the photography side, it's interesting to see what is now possible in still photography, because we do have the bandwidth to support that, and see that that will eventually happen on the side of video.
Wow, the thing that we are learning right here is invest on your internet connection. Get the possible best that you absolutely can. Now, quick question to Steven. Before I get into all the questions that are coming on YouTube and Twitter. Steven, you didn't have the director next to you when you were going through the scenes, or did you?
Are we talking about the banker?
The banker.
In that case, Joel, our editor, and George, our director, were primarily in the same room.
Oh, they were.
Quite a bit of the day. But that is before anything with COVID-19 happened. And the remote relationship that we had sort of set up for when we leave the office was more for how myself and the editor would interact. So that's the relationship between the assistant editor and the editor, not so much the editor and the director, if that makes sense.
Okay, sure. So then actually that ties in really well with the question that is here on YouTube. It's from Ricardo Aranha. And he asks, do you think that some soft skills for human interactions can be lost during the remote work? How to get in touch with all of the people in the project? So what's your opinion on that?
I mean, I think, especially in post-production, it's always going to come down to, I mean, let me make sure I'm interpreting soft skills. Are we talking about just being nice to people at this point?
Well, not really. And okay, so I'm gonna jump to Chris here, because the thing is, he was just saying that a video with the client says a lot more than any words that they might say. So I'm imagining that Chris is saying their faces once he's showing the cut, and then he's like, oh, I already know that you didn't like this, right, Chris? How does that work for you? You're on mute. Yeah.
Trying to be a good file share.
Thank you, Chris.
I absolutely agree that facial expression is part of it. Also, a good audio feed, as Sophie has outlined in her article, is imperative. I think that when you imagine sitting in a room trying to concentrate on an edit where there's construction happening out the window, or there's kids upstairs pounding and screaming on something, and there's audio distractions. You may be able to hear what you need to hear, but your mind is constantly trying to filter. That's why, have you ever noticed when you see somebody across the crowd and they start kind of talking toward you, the fact that you can see them helps you focus in on them. There's amazing stuff that our brains and our eyes and our ears do together. So I think that seeing that person's face and doing everything you can to isolate out any sort of audio interference, it makes for a better work environment. And when I started wrestling with this idea of sharing my screen or sharing my edit remotely, about Sophie and I were talking about it was predated the iChat theater that was in Final Cut 7, so I'm going to say about 15 years ago. And ironically enough, I was doing it with Apple. And I was sharing an edit over iChat. I realized that in the nirvana would be able to see them both ways, have everybody hear everything comfortably, and not be wrestling with, hey, can you turn up your speakers a little more? Oh, a little down. I can't hear. It's kind of warbled or whatever. When those things started to drift away, people would embrace it. Like Sophie was saying, her clients are embracing it. And I think that it's really important, and there's a certain amount of almost responsibility for some of us that understand what we can do with Bebop or Frame.io or all of these different solutions. We need to push the market forward. And we do that by showing the benefits analysis of what you get out of it. For me, this one producer she couldn't leave her home. She had just had foot surgery. And when I showed her what I could do through Zoom, she said she'd never set foot in our office again. And but she saw the benefit of it. But we need to kind of push this forward. What our current situation, with COVID, there's a lot of extra push behind us. I mean, I started working with one of our clients. I tried to get them to embrace Skype a couple of years ago, and they said, absolutely not. We could never use Skype. That's a million excuses. And today they're going like, yeah, we're trying to push it through because they need to. So necessity is the mother of invention. And right now, the necessity in front of us is, one, we want to keep working, but at least in the corporate world, they need to keep communicating. A month and a half ago, we had a meeting at our office, and I said to everybody, I said, whatever is coming down the pipeline, and we all kind of knew that this, where we currently are today, might be where we were going, unfortunately. But whatever is coming down the pipeline, people still need to communicate. We need to share ideas, and that's what we do very well in the corporate video space. And so let's keep doing what we do. Let's give people the options of what we can do for them. And I think that there's actually going to be plenty of work moving forward. And I got to say, I mean, I feel guilty saying it because I know that so many of my friends in the industry are struggling right now. I've been working every day. And it's a blessing. I understand that. I'm not trying to brag about that, but keep your eyes open. Look over the fence. I've said this for decades. You always have to look over the fence at what's coming next. So these type of solutions that we're hearing about, these are things that all of us need to dig into, and they all solve different problems. So in your particular industry, in your particular niche, find the solution that works the best and present it to your clients. And I hope we can all get through this, because it's a crap situation we're in right now, but there are solutions. So keep looking forward.
Well, for as much as I would really love to hear everyone's take on this question, because I think it's extremely important, I will have to move on because there are so many interesting questions coming in. Okay. So I apologize that I'm not going to get to everyone to answer this question, but we're going to have last remarks for everyone in the end of the broadcast. Then you take as much time as you want to maybe put all of this together. There is a tip that came through YouTube from Isaac Teronis, one of our friends here. And he says, hello everyone. For screening, besides Mike Woodworth's work, and if you haven't seen yet, Mike, he created Scopebox, a software to use scopes on his program that's coming from, and getting the video feed from NLEs. I hope I'm describing this correctly. And he has been working on a software way to get the feed coming out of the NLEs and putting that as a webcam. And so basically doing what Sophie does with hardware, but on the software end. So very soon we might end up seeing that feature of iChat Theater coming on a third party soon. And Isaac says that you can also check out the webcamoid, webcam OID in the end. So it's all one word. You can see there on the comments. So let's take a look at that later as well. Now, another question that we have here, of course, we have Daniel Saldivar saying, Tony, a hi to Tony there. And Ricardo also mentioned that he wasn't sure if that question about soft skills would be applied to this industry, but I think it totally applies. We all need to interact with people. Silvia Biagioni in Twitter, she's asking, what about sensitive content, rushes? Is it safe to have it on Dropbox? Are there safer systems out there? And she also asked what was the software that was being used integrated to Premiere for sharing edit and feedback notes. That sharing feedback notes is Frame.io. And about the safety of Dropbox, Michael, do you have any insight on that?
Well, I think there's a big scare in the industry that the cloud isn't secure. And what's funny is the cloud is actually really secure. It's us as people who fall victim to social engineering and someone guesses our password or knows our mother's maiden name. That seems to be the issue more than the cloud not being secure. What I would check on first is if you want to use Dropbox, does anything in your contract preclude you using it? The contract you signed, if you signed one, should outlay or should lay out the security guidelines, meaning you can't have anything on the cloud. If it isn't the cloud, it has to be on this provider with this type of account. So you really have to go back to the paperwork you signed. Dropbox is not the most secure, but it is more secure than most. So, again, the broad generalizations are very rough like that when I don't know the caliber of content you're working on or who you're being hired by. So you really need to check out what your contract says and go from there.
And probably also the terms of services from the service. Yes,
Quick
Chris?
question. Michael, what was the first car you drove?
My first car was an 89 Mercury Sable, if I'm not mistaken.
And your dog's name? I'm just
All right. There is a question here from
Felipe,
Gustavo.
if I can.
Yeah, of course.
I would add to the security thing, if you're really concerned about cloud not being secure, then a peer-to-peer service might be better. Right?
Yeah,
Like the resilience thing that
excellent.
I'm using, there
Yep.
is no cloud in between. It's just a direct peer-to-peer. Obviously, that means that only the two of us have the data. It's not available to a bunch of other people at the same time unless they set it up on their end too. But if that is a concern, then that's a pretty good way to go about it.
Yeah, and of course, that way you can do two things. You can encrypt the data and you can encrypt the traffic. And the traffic and the one that you're using is encrypted already. And the data being encrypted, of course, once you're sharing with more people, it becomes a little bit of a nightmare. But yeah, it's totally possible. It's excellent that you mentioned that. And there's one thing that we need to keep in mind, of course, is just that if it's point to point, the computers need to be constantly online. Otherwise, and it's better if they are
And at that point, you
doing
can
the
set up
background.
VPNs. You could build a completely secure network and set up a VPN to protect
Yeah.
the data path between A to B. It's all possible.
Steven, you were
Yeah,
going to say something, yeah?
I was going to add two more things. I think actually Frame.io's enterprise subscription had a pretty great security audit not too long ago. And additionally, for my personal work, if I know Sophie was talking a lot about the idea of like a proof of concept that she took with her with one client to sort of help ease the concerns of clients after that. Well, one thing you could probably do to ease the concern of a client is to learn a little bit more about encryption. I personally make encrypted DMGs when I'm working with sensitive material if I'm trying to ease someone's anxiety. So password protecting files, it's not ideal for certain kinds of situations. You don't want to create an encrypted DMG of 20 terabytes of footage. It doesn't really make too much sense. But for smaller clusters of media, it might be a lot more applicable.
Tony, you also had something to say?
Yeah, I agree with Steven. It's, Frame.io is gone under a lot of stress tests for security. We have an enterprise version. If it's good enough for us, Fortune 100 companies is perfectly, I trust them, and I don't want to get deep into, direct VPNing and all this stuff because I don't know how to do that. But, we keep all of our media on Frame.io, and I know it's secure, I know it's safe. Obviously, if somebody can guess my password, it's my dog's name plus my birthday, then that's a different story. But we keep everything on there. We can password protect it. We have control over it, and you only use Dropbox or Google for our admin type of administration, documents, scripts, that type of stuff.
All right. I have a little bit of a backstory here about Frame.io. When Frame.io started, I was working for a Fortune 500 company, and immediately I said, we have to use this service. And the company, of course, was a very big company, used to dealing with very big other companies in terms of using their services. And Frame.io was in the beginning, so they didn't have any of the security audits. And my company said, okay, you gotta have this. and they saw the need of having that, and Frame.io went there and took on themselves to go and certify themselves and never stopped. So the other clients they ended up asking for higher levels of security, so they kept on doing so. There's a theme here on Frame.io is it's a service that a lot of people have been using, a lot of companies have been using, and I don't think anyone here has any problem on recommending them. Okay, keep on going with the questions. There's one here for Michael from Gustavo Heineken. He's asking if you guys have been seeing any help from governments for this quarantine in the film industry. Michael, anything?
Well, there's been the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, I think is the name, which is supposed to be, if I understand it correctly, an advance on your refund from your taxes, which doesn't really sound like a paycheck relief. It sounds like an advance. But as far as government subsidies, I haven't encountered anything except for, going to maybe your car insurance company and saying, "Hey, I'm not driving to work anymore. Can I get a discount on my rates?" So there's been little things like that, but aside from PPP, I haven't heard of any government subsidies or breaks for those in the film industry.
Sophie, are you seeing anything surrounding that on your end?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest, I don't know that you call it a break, but I guess the biggest support is that as freelancers, you can apply for unemployment. And I know in New York and I think California, that system is ready to go. So if you are a freelancer in the film industry that wouldn't normally qualify, get on the website. If you're not working, apply for unemployment, get through the process. There will be lots of questions that don't apply to you as a freelancer. Just plow through it and you can eventually get there. And that is a huge help. That's something a protection that we've never had. And so that's huge. Other than that, I know there are, at least in New York, I think nationwide, a ton of small business grants. A lot of the smaller production houses that I've worked with in the past, ad agencies, they have had to furlough or just kind of shut down because they've lost all their clients. Nobody's shooting. So for those companies, there's a lot of support as far as grants go, and I do think they come with a lot of
strings attached.
A lot of strings attached, a lot of stipulations about how you have to keep people on the payroll and all that stuff. But there's definitely stuff to look into, and it's probably worth it doing it sooner rather than later.
Okay, there's a question here in two parts from William Brito. Like Chris said, sooner. Everyone can stream right now. Do you think in the future their eyes will be less demanding about video quality like MP3 today? MP3 is pretty much awful, but nobody complains. Chris, what do you think about that?
Well, I want to remind all of us here that the world used VHS for 30 years, and VHS is crap. It was, even when they had Betamax as an option, they chose VHS. So
convenience.
I think that I will be very candid and say that we in this industry, and I'm not talking about the film industry. That's different. You guys are special, but you are. You guys do amazing stuff, unbelievable stuff. But I will tell you that in the bell curve of the video production industry, we completely over obsess over video quality. It drives me nuts. It drives me nuts in our suite. It drives me nuts when the DP wants to oh, hold on, I have to adjust the light. The light's fine. We're going now. We're rolling. Stop touching the lights. We're fine. And so I think that clearly people are realizing that, hey, it's this dude's on a webcam in his living room. And this is what we're going to get because there's no option. There's nobody there to fix the light.
Well, Stephen Colbert is just doing his broadcast in underwear, and he cuts to a camera feed of him on his underwear. So maybe it's setting a little precedent there.
I have avoided Stephen Colbert for a long time. But
okay, could be look, there's another one that did. Ronnie Chen in Trevor Noah. It's not happening in only one place. There are several of those, setting a little bit of precedent in broadcast.
I was on a broadcast yesterday morning where the discussion, and I asked this of everybody on the panel, where the discussion went to the fact that the people on this panel were saying that it was their obvious interpretation. They were saying that these people are obviously trying to make things look and sound bad, like it's coming from their basement. And I've not watched any of what used to be late night television. So does anybody have any insight or opinions about that?
I have a lot of opinions about that, but I think
Is it another show, Felipe?
it is definitely another show because the thing is, people on YouTube have been doing a lot of very great work. Like see Photo Joseph, for example, he creates amazing content. He's by himself. But he's used to do that, and broadcasters are not. There is time. I know, maybe there isn't, but it can be improved. I have a lot of opinions now. I want to just move on to just two questions here, and one of them is for Tony. I know that Tony already wanted to talk, so I'm gonna already throw this one at him, and he can pick up and talk about what he wanted to say as well. But it's also from William Brito, which is, do you think that small projects will follow more by the book workflows that bigger projects understand or use? So hold on, I didn't read this correctly. Let me try to read it again. You think small projects will follow more by the book workflows from bigger projects, like understanding the importance of project and media management?
Well, I think there's a lot of commonalities in our industry. There's a lot of different silos: film, corporate, commercial, and they all share common practices, and they're going to be different a little bit based on each of those different silos, and they're going to be different based on how you work. For example, I don't really have clients that come in and are over my shoulder as I'm working in a live environment, even now. So that's a different workflow. But yes, you should have as highest level organization and communication strategies that you can put in place. So it's always a good thing to look at the enterprise and what is the enterprise doing? How are they handling their organization? And can I glean from that? Can I use that in my process, even though it's a 2-person operation or a 3-person operation, or it's a small project, whether you're recording off of a screen over Zoom or you have a film set. So organization is always good no matter what. You're not going to get away from that. But you don't necessarily need to have some of the stringent things that you do for Hollywood or for Fortune 100 companies, but still take a look at them, see how they're implementing stuff. File names is a huge one. Keeping things organized to know what is a master. Like Michael said, backup strategies. So none of those are not good for anybody. We should always be thinking about that. How that implements for you is going to be a little bit different, but always be looking to push on how you can elevate your management, your organization, your backup, your communication. So yeah, hope that answers your question.
Cool, it definitely answers. Now I'm going to read one more comment and then one more question, and we're going to start doing the rounds here to wrap up, because I think we're going to follow what Chris mentioned in the beginning of the broadcast here. Is we're probably going to do this several times with one-to-ones, because there is just so much to talk about. And I know that we're talking about actionable workflows. We talked about using Frame.io, using your hardware device to stream your screen to your director. We talked about using the cloud purely, using part of the cloud, syncing files, bringing only files, only proxies, using Frame.io on DaVinci to load proxies and then automatically switch those to originals. So there is a lot of things that you can actually do right now to basically improve your remote workflow. But there is one, okay, before the question, there's a comment from Isaac that's about the broadcast on talk shows. Oh yeah, there's definitely a purposeful demake vibe, and it works. See Jimmy Fallon from the Tonight Show with John Krasinski, for example. But there is this question from Daniel Saldivar that I really want every single one of you to answer, and we're gonna go in order and try to make it not that long, Chris. And here's the question. Question for everyone. With COVID-19, are you adjusting your rates to discount for clients, or are you more in demand for online content, thereby increasing your rates, Chris?
My rate is directly related to how much it costs me to buy toilet paper. No. No, I think it would be, I don't think there's any reason to, there's certainly no reason to lower our rates. And if you raise your rates, you're, what's the word I'm looking for? An idiot. And I think that what does have to happen is that people have to understand that, Amazon doesn't ship as fast. FedEx is not necessarily always working as good. So just have some leeway with us of what we can provide. But no, we haven't adjusted our rates at all. Okay,
Michael.
Well, as someone who hasn't been in the chair for quite a few years, I normally am not doing creative work freelance all day, every day. So I haven't had to adjust any rates because I'm not making any money creative. As a consultant, no, my rates haven't changed.
Okay, Joseph, what about you?
I have not changed my rates, and fortunately, I've been keeping really, really busy. If anything, some of my work is in more demand than before. Of course, I had jobs canceled, like going to NAB and speaking engagements, things like that are out the window. But I've been perfectly busy, and no, I'm not changing my rates. Like Chris said, I think that would be a little bit, to raise your rates at a time like this, be a bit disingenuous. Build up a good relationship with a client now, and then when they fall in love with you because you did all this stuff while everybody's trapped at home, raise your rates once the economy's back in order.
Yeah, raising the rates right now would be probably like profiteering during wartime, right? Not great. Sophie?
I haven't adjusted my rates, but I'm on the same project I was on before this happened, so that would have been super awkward if I did halfway in. But I will say something that I think is interesting that is likely to come out of this is that these larger companies, like something like Bebop or Evercast, Clearview, that are generally used to enterprise level clients, studios with massive amounts of money that their cost is a drop in the bucket. It's interesting to see how those companies are responding to more independent creators and much smaller boutiques who they would normally be totally out of their price range. And I think it's interesting that this is showing a push that we smaller creators, we independent creators, we want to use this software, we want to be included, but we can't necessarily be included at the same rate as enterprise clients, as the big Hollywood studios, and seeing which companies respond to that and recognize that need.
Excellent point. How about you, Steven, there in LA?
So for me, my rate has not changed so far. I will leave it to be contextual and to see what happens in the coming months and weeks. I'm probably going to be falling back, though, on some of my more smaller production and commercial experience, as feature films are not really, moving forward right now. They're not starting up. Those are such collaborative efforts, and people want to stay separate while social distancing is still important for everyone's health. But I will say one other reason, at least for me, that changing my rate isn't important is because I'm trying to help communicate the idea that at least for post-production, not much has to change. So I'm hoping to work, for example, with a small studio soon to help them set up a remote workflow for them and their editors and their other assistant editors. And the idea is that the way we work should not change all too dramatically once that is set up. So as long as the work continues to come in for them to edit, on our end, the amount of work being put in and how we're spending our time should not change. But that being said, I do want to make sure I'm hearing out the client. And if, for example, they can't afford me, but they're going to try and get close as best they can, I will adjust accordingly.
Okay, excellent. Well, yeah, like you said, and setting up nowadays is getting easier and easier to make sure that you can work remotely. And Tony, what about you and your rates?
Their rates are bad. No, I haven't adjusted the rates. But I think like Steven was saying, it's all in context. You have to talk to your clients. And the budgets have changed. Some of our budgets have definitely changed, but I think there's always a way to figure something out. So I think if you have an open relationship, you can say, we can do this for you instead of doing that, or have you thought about doing this now? Bless you. So I think that it's important to keep an eye out in how you can still accomplish things for them. Maybe they don't need this and they just need this. Maybe it's about messaging. Maybe you need to give them a discount this one time because it's related to a message for COVID and getting something out. So I think being flexible in how you view each project or potential project is important.
Excellent. And of course, I totally agree with all of you and agree with the idea that is contextual. One of the people that I would like you to go and check it out is Cre8ive from the future. And he talks a lot about the context of how you should charge and what are the possibilities surrounding that, because I am from the belief that we should start thinking about, mainly for corporate clients, that we should be talking about what does that video impact their own business, because I see video as an investment for a company, but of course some other people will see it in a much more pure way, that, oh, this video is an art and I don't like charging for my art and I feel awkward about charging for that art. So there are so many different ways of saying that. And of course, we have been live for like an hour and 23 minutes. And I want to be really respectful to everyone's time here. I know that there is so much to talk about, and I really want to try and make this continue happening throughout the weeks and invite everyone back here and other people as well. So, for example, James Clark asked me and Tony about the jellyfish, if we have used the remote workflow solution yet. And I actually would love to bring the guys from LumaForge here to talk about that, for example. So there will be more videos about remote workflows. You guys can be sure of that. Now, let's wrap up. Chris, how would you pack this nicely for our beautiful audience? And this whole subject of remote editing and talking to client and seeing them as humans over video conference, and of course, still having to make a living and pay your employees.
I think it's very easy to just rewind this and watch this again. You're going to hear a bunch of stuff. I'm going to put somebody on the spot here, though. And actually, there's plenty of super smart people here. But Felipe is next level smart. And we have used his consulting services at Slice Editorial. And he would never take his time on this to say this. But he is absolutely available and knows way too much stuff for one human being. So if you ever are stuck, call the guy. He accepts money internationally. He is it's the best money you're ever gonna spend to keep your business running smoothly when it has to interact with the internet. The rest of it is all just stuff we've all said already.
Chris, thank you so much for that. I mean, you're the best salesman. I should hire you, I think. Michael, how would you summarize
as well?
Look. Just before getting to Michael right here, all of these people in the panel, they're all up for grabs. No, I'm kidding. Like, you can contact them in the article that I wrote just to send out the word about this live stream. Articles.cre8ivebeast.com. It's in the description. You have the website also in the description of the video on YouTube. You have the link directly to Sophie's website, to Tony's, Steven's, everyone's website here. So please reach out to them in case you want to work with them. Right now, you're not limited anymore by distance. You can work with anyone you want anywhere in the world. So, Michael, what's your summary of all of this?
Well, my summary is that this is the new normal, and I'm hoping that when things get back to the old normal, that we'll learn from the lessons and we'll learn from what we've done now, that the old way of doing things isn't the way things need to be done moving forward. And we can accentuate the positives of what we've learned through this and marry it with the positives of the old world and create a new way of collaborating and editing remotely, and bringing our huge world together to make it a little bit smaller so we can create using the positives of both paradigms.
Oh, excellent. Joseph, what about you?
Final thoughts. Things are changing. Everything's changing. Just do what you can to get some work done. We're going to have to think of creative ways to do what we used to do, and everything about this whole production workflow is up for grabs right now. Just get busy. Sitting around doing nothing isn't helping anybody. Figure out what you can do. Figure out how to get involved, be a part of it.
Thank you, Joseph. Sophie?
Similar to what Michael said, I think this is our moment as post-professionals to push this industry exactly where we want it to go. And I think someone had mentioned earlier, Michael at Scopebox, that's a great example where he just tweeted out, oh, I just realized that it might be useful to have a software video feed out from the NLE into webcam software. Yeah, that's incredibly useful. And he had that realization because people were finally talking vocally about, hey, we need this. We've needed this for so long, but we really need it now. And so I think just getting your voice out there, telling people what you need and trusting that someone will see that and be able to fill that need for you it's a really cool and unique moment right now.
And you know what? I had invited Mike for this session as well. He also had accepted, and unfortunately I couldn't fit him in this session. As you guys can see, there are so many people, and there will be a session with Mike coming up. So you guys should definitely stay tuned in the channel here on Twitter. Just follow me and you're going to know about that. And how about you, Steven?
Well, I'm very excited about Sophie's solution. I'm very excited about the Scopebox developer and what he's working on. I'm very excited about Bebop. And I think one of the silver linings in what's happening right now is it's a really interesting opportunity where companies are paying a little bit more attention to how we have to communicate right now. And so this is our opportunity to create exactly the kinds of demand that we're hoping to see from these tech professionals and from the software that they create. And I would just say that I'm absolutely humbled to be here among these post-production superheroes, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Steven. And Tony, again, last but absolutely not least.
Yes, first of all, thank you for having me on. I'm very appreciated. And there's so many opportunities. Change is good. Things are changing, and they're changing rapidly. So there's always opportunity. Be open to opportunities. Be open to your relationships. I think relationships are key in our industry. It's a collaboration that's across the pond or across wires, but it's still about relationships. So go back and listen to those relationships, and you'll probably find ways that you can help bring your clients into this new frontier. So there's still lots of opportunities out there. And again, thank you.
Well, I'm going to take your words as well. Change is good. Change is good, and we should all be welcoming it. And that's it. Thanks to all panel members to have participated on this conversation, and let's keep this conversation going online with the hashtag workflow questions. Don't forget to like, subscribe, enable the bell notification to be notified next time we go on air, because there will be next times, and share this with your network. And of course, thanks to all of you on the audience for having sent your questions, comments, and inputs. Your opinion is definitely very valued by all of us. So hope you all have a great rest of the week, and see you next time.